Hi, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Govs on the Go Alumni Edition, a podcast featuring alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. My name is Dr. Buzz Hoon. I'm the dean of the college. I'm also the host of the podcast. And today I'm talking with Daniel Armitage, who graduated with a degree in speech, communication, and theater back in 1983. Danny, so great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Buzz. It's great to be here.
We first met at a nice celebration on campus, and during that period of time, you heard my plea to say, I would love to have you on the podcast, and you followed up. And so it's so great to actually have you talking about your time back in the 1980s. And so it's going to be a really fun reminiscing time. But why don't we give everybody a life update? What's going on and where are you at?
Well, I'm currently at the University of North Texas. I've been here I'm finishing up my 10th year here. I'm Associate Vice President for Student Affairs. Mainly, I run auxiliary services, which are things like housing, dining, the student union, the basketball coliseum, bookstore, things that generate revenue on a college campus. My wife and how did I get here? At the age of 55, I got a phone call saying, you ought to apply for this job. And I was like, oh, they're not going to be. The next thing I knew, and my wife looked at me and she said, what are you doing? Why? I was at the University of Memphis for 31 years. And she said, what? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'm having a midlife crisis. I just wonder if at this age of 55, I can go start all over and do it again and make something happen at a different campus. And so my wife, my daughter was still in high school. So when she graduated, she went around and we toured multiple different schools. And she ended up choosing North Texas. And I said, you don't have to do that just because Dad is here. And she said, no, and I don't know if she's following in footsteps, but she got a degree in musical theater, and she is now living in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, and she's working at Sardi's, a high-end theater district restaurant. She's done 2 off Broadway shows, and she's doing nothing but auditioning all over the place.
Oh, that's
that's how I got here, and it's been a very fun experience. It's been an experience where I've been able to create and do some really interesting things.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot in common, actually, with our career paths, and we'll talk about how you got there through Austin Peay. But let's rewind and go all the way back. You said you're self-described Navy brat, because you said your family moved around a lot, eventually ending up in Hendersonville. So talk a little bit about, when did that happen? When did you move to Hendersonville? When did you become a Tennessean? And what kind of things were you interested in as a young person?
Yeah, that's going back a good ways. So yeah, my dad was in the Navy, and we lived in Brunswick, Maine. We lived in Whidbey Island, Washington State. We lived in multiple different places. His final tour, he ended up actually working, I think the street in Nashville is called West End. And they had a naval recruiting district where he was a master chief responsible for 4 states and all of the recruitment in those areas. And that's how we got to Hendersonville. We moved to Hendersonville when I was probably in the seventh, eighth grade, something along those lines. Um, and what happened there, I went out for the football team. I auditioned for the school play and got a cast, and then I got to high school, and I found my niche hanging around in this area called forensics and in theater. And so I spent most of my time there. But I also, I got a job working at a local convenience store, delicatessen type of an area. And from there, those interests, well, I don't know how much you can edit out of this, but um, I graduated from high school. I took a year off. I was dating a young lady there in Hendersonville, and we ended up going to Europe on a theater tour and came back, and both of us were working full-time jobs. And what I found was we could not make it from one paycheck to the other paycheck, even though she was living with her parents and I was living with my parents. And I went, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So one day I took off work and I drove up to see a friend at Austin Peay. And she said she had an exam. She was an art major. I think she ended up working at Austin Peay for a period of time, but she was an art major. And she said, I've got to take this exam. What are you going to, can you hang out and we can go grab lunch afterwards? So in that hour that she was taking that exam, I walked over and I met a faculty member by the name of Jim Holmes, who asked me for an audition piece. I didn't have one. He gave me a script. I ended up doing an audition for 3 or 4 faculty members. And in a period of about 35 minutes, they offered me a performance scholarship.
That's incredible.
I said, I haven't even applied. So he walked me over to admissions. I gave him a $5 bill, I think at the time. I filled out the application and I went home that night and I told my parents, I'm going to college.
Wow.
That's how I got to the P. I mean, it was, and then a guy named Mike Gocher, who they recently named the theater over in Traherne after, who ended up being my one and only roommate in college. Um, he invited me over to his house. He lived close by, not where I lived, but so I went over there for like a barbecue. And several of the faculty members came out, and there were some other people from the university that were there. And this is just something that he, as a junior, decided to do for the incoming freshmen. He and I got to be good friends. I met Joe Filippo and a guy named Jim Elder, who was a faculty member, a guy named Reese Elliott, who was a faculty member, John Griffin, who was a faculty member. And there I was at Austin Peay.
Wow. So that's how we actually happened to have you come into our ranks, and that is an amazing story. Let's rewind a little bit and talk about your interest in theater. Did you always kind of realize? I mean, was there because you felt like you had the talent to do that, or because it was challenging? It presented to you a challenge that, to get up and find the ability to entertain other people.
Um, I don't know. While I was in middle school and in high school, I this concept of taking other people's words and trying to figure out how to make meaning out of them, how to create an experience. A lot of people in the theater today, they think of it in terms of some type of reality when it's really a theater moment that causes people to move to a an emotional response to something that is prevalent in their life. And I forget who said that, it's an imitation of life. But if Shakespeare said all the world's a stage and all we are actors upon it, what I found was I really enjoyed telling these stories. And I think I got into it when I was in high school. I would go to these tournaments and we would do prose readings, one act play readings, or one act play performances. We would do duet acting performances. And there were a group of people that I liked that were friends that we were connected with. And somehow or another, I ended up being recognized as being good at that.
Hmm.
So then I got to an interesting story, and it kind of leads itself to what can you tell students? I had an older brother that went to a different university, and he did not do well. So he came back from his freshman year, and it was a very concerning relationship between my parents and my brother. So when I went to Austin Peay, I said, I don't care what I do, I'm going to come out of that first year with good grades, period. I'm not going home. So I had faculty members and people saying, do this, get audition for this, do this. And I said, no, first and foremost, I'm going to learn how to make good grades. And then I'll get involved in all that stuff. Well, my that holiday break, I went home. My grades came in, of course, in paper form back there then. And I came walking in the door, and my parents were like, you have a 4.0. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. How did you do that? And I said, I just made a decision. Now, I won't tell you I made a 4.0 through my whole undergrad. However, I think that first year taught me a lot about that. And then right after that, I auditioned for a Shakespeare play with Joe Filippo, who directed it. I auditioned for a couple of shows that John Griffin directed. I was in Neil Simon plays. I was in The Runner Stumbles. So I ended up doing a show called Inherit the Wind, where I got the lead in that, and Joe Filippo directed it. A guy named John Ignacio still hanging around the Clarksville area. John was in that with me, and so it was one of these things. I did shows at the old Soldier Show Center up in Clarksville up in Hopkinsville, up at the military base, Fort Campbell. Um, I just enjoyed it, had a good time. Um, and that's how I got into the theater and into
Wow.
speech.
Boy, did you get involved then. And what?
Exactly. And then, when I moved and my first when I moved onto campus, my first dorm was Ellington Hall, which is no longer a dorm, of course.
Right.
And the first person I met was the RA. And halfway through the semester, he looked at me and he said, you need to be an RA. So then I was an RA in Ellington Hall. I was an RA in Miller Hall. Um, and then when I graduated, I got a job, my first job in higher education. I got hired to be the hall director at Cross Hall, which is gone, right? But I also got hired to be the games room coordinator in the Morgan Student Center.
Yep.
And all I did was run in there and I ran pool tables and ping pong tables and video games. And I created a movie TV room, and I had students come in and watch movies. And I just threw parties. And that's how I think I got really connected in higher ed.
It is amazing to see all these things that happen within your life and how they have shaped you into the professional that you are now. Even, you mentioned in your notes to me that you were involved with SGA.
That was a good buddy of mine ran for SGA, and he said, I want you to be involved. And I said, okay, how do you want me to be involved? I'm not running. He said, I need a treasurer. So I wrote up a little thing and I went before the SGA and they voted me in as the SGA treasurer. And from that, I got involved doing some different things. Um, yeah, every time I turned around, somebody would say, "Hey, why don't you do this?" And I'd go, and that's kind of a word that I would say to students. Don't think about it in terms of, uh, I don't think I can do that. Just jump out there and try. If you can't do it, it's going to pop up and they're going to go, "Oh, okay, that's not your strong suit." But most of the time, you're going to find you can develop skills that you never even thought you had.
Absolutely. Another thing that you mentioned was the AP Playhouse.
I was very heavily involved in the AP Playhouse. I was the president of the AP Playhouse. We were the body that we ran the box office. We built the sets. We did a lot of different things for the theater department, and making sure that students were learning every step of the way.
Yeah. And you also mentioned that just as a student, you had a chance to meet with the president, Dr. Rigg at the time, and Riggs, I mean, and it led to the campus radio station.
Yeah, that was a very unusual one. And that's a word I would say to students is be creative, think about it, reach out and do those things. So I got invited to a student leader lunch and they were there and they were talking about, different leaders were talking about important things to them. And he went around and finally he said, "Danny, what about you?" And I said, "Why don't we have a radio station?" And he said, "Well, we're going to partner with this radio." I said, "I know that, but all that's going to mean is our students are just going to run cables. Our students are just going to do all of the odds and ends jobs. If we had our own radio station and we could literally run it, we could engineer it, we could do all of those things, it would be a much better learning experience." And he said, "Well, how much?" He said, "How much do you think it would take?" And I said, I mean, I was a senior in college. I made up some number. I had never researched it in the least little bit. And I said, "I think we could do the whole thing for this amount of money." Well, after that lunch was over, I moved quickly over to the chair of the department, a guy named Joe Filippo. And I walked up to his office, and he was on the phone with President Riggs, who said to him, "I need you to research what it would take to put a radio station on this campus," before I even got to open my mouth. And Joe got off the phone and he said, "That's the craziest thing." He said, "I've put in 5 proposals for a radio station in my time here, and nobody has ever taken me seriously. And out of the blue, the president calls me." And I just said, "Well, that's great." And I said, "You're doing a great job, Joe." And he looked at me and he said, "What did you want to talk about?" I said, "Oh, it's not important. I think this is much more important." Now later on, because we had a good relationship. He's a great mentor of mine today.
Absolutely.
Um, he called me up and he said, "You did this." And I said, "No, all I did was open my mouth and say something."
Well, that is the power of being a student leader, and I think that is remarkable. When you all came back for the naming of the Gocher Theater, and I saw quite a few of you. You had uh, such a great relationship. It seemed like from many of the classmates of that period of time. It must have been a real bonding experience to be with those people back in it had been the early 80s.
It was just remarkable. Everybody from Lee Ellen Beach, who is the daughter-in-law of Thayer Beach, who was one of my professors in college. Um, to Randy Sullivan, Glenda Sullivan, and so many people that I did shows with, and I built sets, and I was in that theater at 2 o'clock in the morning, hanging lights and doing all the stuff that you need to do, and just having a ball. And I'm so blessed in so many ways because I had that group of people that I've stayed in contact with. Mike and Sarah. I was in Mike and Sarah's wedding. Um, I've stayed in touch with them, but then I also had this other group in housing. And it was this group of guys, a guy named Dwayne McDowell, who's a chemist up in St. Louis, Scott Barker, who's a journalist over in Knoxville, Dedrick Urigan, I think, is a registered nurse, uh, might be a nurse practitioner. Um, this group of guys that we got to be friends with in the halls. Bill Prim, who went down to Miami and made a bucket of money, and I think he's retired now over in North Carolina somewhere. We just hung out together. We did so many crazy things together. When it snowed, we were out walking the campus. We were out walking you know, so many great memories. And and those are the types of things that people don't really understand. It's hard to see how that is changing you at that time in your
Right.
life. But 10, 15 years later, you start going, wow, that had an impact on my first job, my second job, my third job. That really helped change and shape me in so many ways.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And after graduation, you decided to go to graduate school, and sometimes our paths are always not very linear. They're not narrow and straight as we expect them to be. We usually think we're going to end up now to this next point. Can you talk about your experiences with then getting through graduate school?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I left Austin Peay and I went out to San Diego, and I was going to go to the University of California, San Diego and study theater. And I got out there and it was real expensive. While they waived out of state tuitions and things along, the fees were just going to, it was going to be difficult for me to survive and to do that. So I got a job, a couple of different jobs, and I ended up doing some volunteer work. And I was literally sitting there going, what am I doing in California? This is not really what I want. And this isn't the community that I want. So I left there and I went to Memphis. It was Memphis State University at the time. I got a job as a hall director. I also got cast in shows at the old Gaslight Dinner Theater at Playhouse on the Square in Memphis, and I did several different things there. And then that summer, another connection of mine got me a job in the theater down in Florida because I was on a 10-month contract. So I had summers off. So I went to Florida and did theater, came back, and the director of housing at the time, a guy by the name of Dwayne Rice, he and I would sit around after work and argue, talk over a beverage. And he told me if I was going to argue with him to take a class and learn something. So I ended up taking this class on student development theory. And come to find out, it was the faculty member was one of the leading leading researchers in higher education student learning, a guy by the name of Art Chickering, who wrote a book called Education and Identity and several different things. And his theories basically ended up being the foundation for the whole student affairs profession. I didn't know this from Adam. I just thought he was some guy that taught at Memphis, right? So I go to my first professional conference and they're talking about my faculty member. So I go back to class and I said, they were talking about you. And he said, yeah. I said, so you're like really important. Well, I ended up learning from him. And so I took one class, then I took the next class, I took the next class. And it was really kind of interesting to hear how faculty think of the world of higher education and what the campus experience needs to be, and to think about what I was experiencing as a practitioner at the same time.
Right.
Well, that theater in Florida called and offered me a full-time job, and I had to make a decision. Do I go to Florida and do a full-time theater job, or do I finish my master's degree? And I just said, I'm going to finish what I started. So I stayed and finished my master's degree. Started as a hall director. 31 years later, I retired as associate vice president and dean of students, and at a large research university in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's how I found myself in this profession.
Yeah. Again, a remarkable, just as you got your story about how you got to Austin Peay and now how you got into your master's program at Memphis State and then which led you to that job. One of the things you mentioned in your notes to me is how rewarding it has been for you. One of the rewarding parts of this job is seeing students succeed at different levels, and that really is true for I think anyone in higher education. So, can you talk a little bit about during that period of time how you grew as a person, as a professional, and how that you started to see the benefits of what you were doing on other people's lives?
So it's interesting where you go in and in any job, the boss says we need to achieve these things. So then I go and I sit down and I try to figure out how am I going to achieve those things. So I met all of these students. When I first got to Memphis, what I found was that my staff was a very homogeneous group of guys. And I asked the question, why isn't there more other people in this? And they said, well, they don't apply. So I got up and I walked around two residence halls and I talked to these guys. I shook their hands and I said, you ought to apply. And I had people look at me and say, yeah, right. I said, what do you mean? And they said, they're not going to hire somebody like me. Well, that next fall, I had the most diverse staff on campus. I always had the most diverse most diverse employees on campus. I had people, international students. I had people from Nashville. I had people from Little Rock. I had people from Memphis. And it's those kinds of things. And so from that, what I found was when I was an RA, they would say, you need to do these programs. And what I found was instead of me just coming up, I'd go to the guys and say, what do y'all want to do? And they say, well, let's go shoot basketball. We'd go shoot basketball and I'd write it up as a program. I would be in a show and they all showed up to see me in the show and I wrote it up as a program. It was ways that you can get people out of their comfort zone to meet other people. We would do floor meetings and they'd say, you put out these signs and have everybody come to the lobby. Well, instead of doing that, I just went up and down the hall, knocked on the door and said, hey, come out in the hallway. So I got 50 guys standing around in the hallway and I said, huddle together. And I told them all the stuff that they needed to know. And I said, now shake somebody's hand, meet somebody. And so it is, what I find is when students feel like they belong somewhere, that they've got friends and they've got connections, then in the classroom, they're going to work harder so they can stay.
Amen.
If they don't work harder so they can stay and they don't retain and graduate, and that's when other people in the management structure, a guy named Bob Nettles, who was the dean of students there at a time and ran housing, he pulled up and he asked me, so the next thing I knew at Austin Peay and now at Memphis, and I was being asked by management to come in and to train people on how to just get people involved and engaged. And what I find is, and particularly in today's world with all of these telephone things, we try to do everything through email and text message. And during COVID, my boss called me and said, there's a student in a hall that's sick and we need the student to go to the health center. And I said, well, what's the student's name? And they said, well, we need somebody to go. So I just got up, here I am, an associate vice president. I just got up and walked down to the hall. I went and I said, I need to go to room 108. I went, knocked on the door. This kid opens the door. And I said, are you sick? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, I need you to do two things. First thing you got to do is call your mother right now.
Good.
Second thing you need to do is you've got to go to the health center so that they can test you for COVID. Oh, yeah, all right. I said, no, you don't understand. If you don't do this, you may not be able to stay here. So about 2 hours later, my boss calls me and said he never showed up at the health center. So I get up and I walk over there and I knock on his door. And I said, you never went to the health center? He said, no, you scared me so bad. I went to the emergency room. And I said, okay. So I went, but that's the kind of thing, if it's just a little effort.
Yeah.
Just go out and get involved. Just go out and learn the lines. Go out and do the things that you're supposed to do and make it work. And that's when I got into this business. And I don't know what all is in your group of departments, academic, but I used to do things at Memphis and here at UNT. Now the running rage is every dean wants a coffee shop in every academic building that's out there because they think that's a gathering place, right? And I fundamentally can't do that. But every academic building has vending machines in them. So I went out and I bought some really nice furniture, some banquettes, and created some destination locations centered around vending machines and a microwave. And it changed the culture of that academic space. There was a space where people went, this is where we're supposed to go to hang out.
Right.
And I would do things like, and I steal a lot of my ideas. Any good actor always steals their
Of course.
right? Go to a restaurant that has little wooden games that people can play while they're waiting for their food.
Right.
If we would do more things like that to pull people together, rather than saying we got to post everything on social media, how are we going out and standing there and saying, hi, I'm Danny, what do you do? What's going on? So those are the types of things that I think helped me get to where I am today.
Absolutely. And one of the things you also mentioned is you kept active as an actor in the theater, and you also attributed Austin Peay to your success in your ability to continue that. Can you talk a little bit about how long were you doing that, and how were you fitting all that in?
It's interesting. While I was in Memphis, the first couple of things I did was because I needed a job and I needed money, right? And it was great to get a job at the dinner theater because every night you went into work, you could eat for free. So that's one meal that you didn't have to worry about. Um, Once I realized my profession is going to be higher education, theater world took a little bit of a back seat.
Sure.
But I made enough friends and I had enough success in Memphis that I would get people. Literally one day, a guy named Kenny Zimmerman, who was the artistic director at Playhouse on the Square in Memphis, Tennessee, he called me and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm working. And he said, can you come down to the theater at lunch? And I said, sure, why? He said, I'll tell you when you get here. So lunch comes around, I drive down there, and he said, we fired an actor from their professional company this morning, and we need somebody to do this role in a show called La Ronde. It was an Arthur Schnitzler play, a German play. And I said, wow, okay. When does it open? 2 days.
Okay.
So I was like, and he said, can you come back at 5 when you get off work? So I went back to work. I walked in the director's office and he said, how are you going to learn all that stuff in 2 days? I said, I don't know, but I'm going to try. And I did. And, so I was heavily involved there when I got to Denton, Texas, to the University of North Texas. There's a really nice little community theater rep company that's up on the square. My wife and daughter had not joined me yet, so I was just trying to find something to do. And I go up there because there's a lot of little restaurants. And I walked by the theater and it said auditions tonight. I thought, well, I just got here. I had been here a week. And so I walked in and I sit in the back of the theater. And the guy who was directing the show said, are you here to read? And I said, no, I'm just got here. I want to see what's going on. He said, well, get up and read. And I said, well, the next thing you know, I'm auditioning. And I sat there and I cast the whole show in my head. And I left and I went, well, that was fun. That was a nice way to kill an evening. 2 days later, they offered me the lead in the show.
Oh, Danny.
Then they called me and asked me if I would serve on their board of directors. Then they asked me if I would direct The Graduate. And so I've been heavily involved in theater all my life. And I will tell you, a guy named Joe Filippo and a guy named not Jim Holmes, John Griffin are the reasons why I continue to do this stuff because I had such a great experience of just hanging out and doing fun things. And I think it's that connection of where you feel like you belong. I mean, even today when my buddies and I sneak into Clarksville and we go wander around our old stomping grounds, I walk onto that campus and I have a sense that I belong there, that this is something that helped make me who and what I am. And that's what I would say to students is, and here's the other thing I would tell them. Now we have an electronic catalog, but universities still have catalogs, and these are the requirements. So I sat there and I learned it. I read it. I went through the whole thing. I knew how many classes I had to have, lower division, upper division, how many I had to have for a minor, how many I had for a major. I knew how many I could have by credit by exam. I knew all of that stuff. I knew how to take special projects. So I graduated in 4 years with the exact number of degree hours that you needed to have, with the exact number of undergrad, and exact number. I mean, I played it to exactly what that book said.
Mm. Well, I still think you have an aura around you that somehow brings people to invite you into their orbit somehow. And
Well, you're
you
too
know,
kind.
and right now you are, as you said, at North Texas. North Texas has seen, I think, really significant growth
Huge
at the
growth.
university, and you've been dealing with all that. I just do you sometimes reflect back and think, now that you're on this, second part of your career, you think, what, I mean, you've got to say to yourself, this has been a great blessing, and how amazing
Unbelievable
it
blessing.
is.
Yeah, I when I got here in 2016, in the first 5 years from design to opening, I put 4 buildings on the campus, built 4 buildings.
Wow.
When I got here in 2016, the dining operation was doing about $22 million a year in sales. Today, we're doing $42 million a year in sales. We are ranked by niche.com and by delish.com is the best dining program in the state of Texas, better of any college and university. And yet we also have the lowest meal plan costs. And I say, well, this isn't good. You don't want to be known as the best and the cheapest. You want to be known as the best and somewhere in the middle of the pack, right? Um, but we're a self-op Whole Foods dining program where I had up until Vanderbilt this year the only 100% vegan dining hall in the country. And Vanderbilt came here with a group of people about 4 years ago, and they opened this fall a dining hall, 100% certified vegan, no animal products or byproducts ever enter the kitchen. And they based it off of what we're doing here.
That's right. Because you take good ideas and you steal them. That's what you
It's
do.
exactly right. That's exactly right. So I have two hydroponic gardens where we harvest 4 acres a week of vegetables that go straight to our dining table. I've got a bakery. I've got a housing program that when I got here was probably in the top of 40% in the country. The last 6 years, they've been rated as the number one in the top 1%, not number one, in the top 1% in achieving learning outcomes, learning goals, retention, all of the things that you're trying to do with housing program.
Mm.
And it's just changing that mentality of saying, and here's the other piece I will tell you. I think we in higher education get stuck at times into, well, this is what these people want to hear and these people want to. I have spent my career trying to figure out what is an 18, 19, 20-year-old thinking? What is it that they want?
Right.
And if I can figure out a way to get them connected, I'm going to achieve my goals. The other thing that I will tell you is that's changed in the culture here due to some leadership changes that I think is really great. I have found in my career, anytime I can help somebody else achieve their goals, somehow my goals just magically are achieved.
That's right.
So I want people to, you should go through life being known as a person that helps, not as a person who's only after their own outcome.
That's right. That's such a terrific statement. And Danny, one of the things that I definitely want to talk a little bit about, you already mentioned your family a little bit, how important it has been for their support of you in this career path.
My wife deserves the Lifetime Achievement Award. We've been married for close to 30 years now, and she's just, time I pull up and I go, hey, we ought to do this. She's, well, okay, crazy man, we'll go do. I've got this lovely daughter who, and where did I go wrong, Buzz? She scored in the top 5% in the nation on SATs in math and top 10% in the nation in SATs in science. And she came to the University of North Texas and studied musical theater. However, she's living her dream. She lives in Manhattan. She's knocking it out. She's having fun. She's 26 years old. She's done a couple of shows. I'm just, they're just an inspiration.
That's right. And I often think about that and think about, they're, they are such gifts, and I'm so excited for what's ahead, for your daughter, for my daughter as well, and how great their blessing that they have been, for our existence. One of the last things we always like to talk about on the podcast is, and you've already kind of addressed it, but I always like to give you the opportunity to say to our students, what kind of recommendations do you have now as a person that's been in higher ed for this period of time?
The biggest recommendation I would say is learn the system and take the system for everything can get. I mean, part of my theater success was Austin Peay invested some travel dollars in allowing me to go and audition. And so, because of those things and others, not just me, because of those things, I got to see some amazing things and build some confidence that I could compete at a national level. Um, when I was on the debate team, I thought I would do it for one semester while I was taking this class. I ended up doing it for 2 years. I ended up on a team that went to the national tournament. I think out of 340 debaters, I was ranked something like 36th in the nation because, and it was because Austin Peay invested in me. That, whatever I was paying for tuition and fees, they were pulling up and finding ways to get me out there and to do the things that I needed to do. I had faculty members that would call me when I was out doing summer stock or something along those lines. Faculty would call me and say, "How's it going? What do you think?" Times when I was scared, they would say, "Why are you scared?" And I would calm down.
Hmm.
So it's building that relationship. It's going into that faculty member's office. It's making them sit down and talk to you. It's it's again in life. I don't care if it's your job or what, particularly in higher education, take advantage of everything. If they pulled up and said, they're going to give away free ice cream out on the mall, I'd be there and I'd eat the ice cream and I'd hang out with my friends. If when they pulled up and they said you can be an RA, and as an RA you get a free room and you get this or whatever it was, the compensation was, I signed up to do it. I said, "What do you need me to do?" "Get 40 guys on your floor to become friends."
Hmm.
I said, "What a great." Now, if there was an emergency, and I dealt with a few emergencies, I had to deal with a suicide attempt. I had to call the police a couple of times. There were things along those lines. But the majority of it was just hanging out with a bunch of crazy college guys and having fun
That's right.
and enjoying that, because there will be a time for this whole adulting work career thing that we all do later on in life. And my daughter would tell you that I went to college and never left. But
I get the same thing.
that's what happens. I mean,
That's
it is important. And the research today, the other thing I will tell people is learn the numbers, read the books, make sure that you know what you're signing up for. Um, a college education today is going to pay you 4 times more than a high school degree. A master's degree and a PhD is going to pay you 2 times more than a bachelor's degree in life.
that's right.
So if you want to be successful, go out there and, if somebody pulls up and says, "Hey, you can do this and we'll send you to Boone, North Carolina for 4 days," go. Take advantage of it. Get involved, do the things, and learn from other people. I've learned so much. A guy named Dedrick Urigan, some of these guys that were this whole, we have this Facebook website of this gang from Miller Hall. And I mean, it's hard to believe, but it's literally been 45 years in the running. Now, there wasn't Facebook back then, but as soon as Facebook, we have this group and we get together and we talk and we laugh. And it's so rewarding to see how, oh, that's what happened to her. Oh, that's what happened to him. So get involved, do it, take advantage of it. That would
Well,
be my recommendation.
good advice. And I don't think we actually named the friend who helped bring you to Austin Peay, but whoever she was in your history, I want to thank her because you, my friend, are an important part of the Austin Peay legacy that we often talk about here. That Dr. Filippo was so important to so many students over that period of time. And you, as a former student of his, help establish that and continue that along. So it's
Well,
really been great having you on the podcast.
Joe Mills, who's at Austin Peay, one of the times this group and I went up there in one of his conference rooms over in Miller Hall, they have a housing wall of fame.
Mm.
And it was so crazy because we went in there and I think it was Jim Townsend or Scott Barker, one of those guys. They said, "Hey, come here." And my name's like, because it's Armitage, it was all in alphabet. I'm not, but it's one of the top names on there that says the guy that worked in housing here is an associate vice president. And it's just so nice to know that I think I helped. I think I had an impact. I think going back to the RA days, I helped some people succeed. I do know I helped one person by getting emergency people there to stay alive while I was at Austin Peay. But it's really important to just make yourself part of something.
Well, it's been great catching up with you and having you share your story. I thank you for being on the podcast.
You are more than welcome, and you are very appreciative of the invitation.
And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for continuing to support the podcast. We hope you will join us as we profile some other alumni from the College of Arts and Letters here at Austin Peay State University. So until next time, stay safe, take care, and God bless.